On today's episode of the Locked On Knicks podcast, just how big of a threat are the Orlando Magic to the New York Knicks Eastern Conference supremacy? That next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to the New York Knicks. My name is Gavin, Schall, a credentialed media member that's been covering the team for about a decade, and I'm the Saturday Coast of the Locked On NBA podcast, so be sure to check out all of my work over there. This is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving those detailed insight on your favorite team 5 days a week. And be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. And today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Football season is closer than you think. And right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel app to get started. On today's episode, as promised, I'm joined by Philip Rossman-Reich, the solo host of the excellent Locked On Magic podcast, to dive deep on the Orlando Magic. I was really curious about the dynamic between Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. What the heck is going on with Franz Wagner's jump shot? Is the guy's a good shooter his whole life and it's just broken down over the last 2 years? And if he figures that out, I think it's pretty plausible that Orlando is right there in a tier with the Knicks, with the Cavs as championship contenders. We talk about the impact Mike Brown is going to have, particularly in terms of lineup optimization. And we get a little bit into Karl-Anthony Towns' defense and whether that is, in fact, a survivable potential fatal flaw for the New York Knicks. We get into all that in just a sec. In case you guys missed it on the Pistons episode yesterday, I want to remind you that I'm on vacation this week. All these were recorded about 2 weeks ago. So if anything happened since then with Orlando that I missed, or anything has happened with the Knicks in the couple of days since I've been gone, I apologize for that. Again, this one was pre-recorded. But without further ado, let's get into it right now with Philip. All right, as promised, I'm joined by Philip Rossman-Reich of the Locked On Magic podcast. You can also find his work as a senior writer over at Orlando Magic Daily. Of course, returning in on the Locked On Magic side of things, I'm Gavin Schall, co-host of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Philip, great to talk to you as always, man. How's your summer been so far?
It's been good. It's been quiet, a little too hot, but that's life these days.
Wow, dark start. Okay. Anyways, let's
hey, this is not a dark podcast. There were years where Magic Knicks crossover would be a dark podcast. These are happy times, my friend. Happy times.
I didn't know we were opening with climate change. All right, let's go optimistic. Do you consider the Orlando Magic a legitimate threat to get out of the Eastern Conference? I think by some people, there's been some poo-pooing of that idea, given that they obviously haven't gotten out of the first round yet with this current group, given their offensive struggles over the last almost decade and a half now. And I think some people not loving the Desmond Bane trade. And I personally think, like, again, to whatever you think of the trade, and I personally thought it was a great move. Even if you thought Orlando moved too many assets, like, I think it's undeniable the way it changes the complexion of this Magic's team, addresses pretty clearly their biggest weakness, unless you want to argue that's initiation, and we can talk about that. But I think they are just fantastically positioned, and with a little bit better health luck, like, they are probably right behind the Knicks and Cavs as the favorites in the Eastern Conference, even if I think there might be a tier drop off there. But do I have that right in your mind? Do you think the Magic could legitimately get out of the East?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen this, the way the Eastern Conference has gone the last few years, and with Boston kind of out of the way, with Indiana kind of out of the way, and again, maybe those teams will be better than we anticipate, but I don't think we view them without Tyrese Halliburton, without Jason Tatum as true title contenders. It feels wide open. Like, it feels like it's wide open, and we've seen in the East playoffs over the last 2 years just how, like, an injury at the wrong time can really throw you off and really throw even elite teams out of the picture or off the trail. So, like, do I think the Magic are going to make the NBA Finals? If you asked me to put a bet down on it, I'd probably say no, that's not a good bet for all the reasons that you said. Like, for all the talent and all the things that this team has done, like, they haven't done it before. Like, the New York Knicks have one playoff series. The Cleveland Cavaliers have one playoff series. The Magic have not done that yet as a group. They have the talent. They're clearly kind of positioned to do that. They're not, they've got a lot to prove on the court. But if everything breaks the right way, This is a team with an elite defense that really just needs a little bit of an offensive boost to get themselves over the hump. They added a really impressive third, fourth scorer, wherever you want to put him in the pecking order, in Desmond Bane. And honestly, like, as I've listened to a lot of people kind of talk about the Magic or try to downplay the Magic's chances, I keep thinking, like, you all forget this team won 47 games 2 years ago. They won 41 games last year, despite Jalen Suggs playing only 36 games, despite Mo Wagner being out from the end of December, from Christmas to the end of the season, despite Paolo Banchero missing 2 months, despite Franz Wagner missing 20 games. Those are the team's top 4 scorers from last year. They had a lot of injuries and they were still 41 wins, very much they obviously were 7th, but very much a team that a lot of teams didn't want to play in the playoffs. So I think the Magic are a little further along than a lot of people think.
All right. So I think, like, if you look at the Magic's 2 biggest weaknesses, we mentioned that stat, right? This is just not a team that even in this era with Paolo, with Franz, I think partially due to those injuries, but they haven't been able to put together a top 20 offense. Obviously, giving up everything they did for Desmond Bane was a move directly aimed at addressing that. Clearly goes a long way to solving their shooting issues, as I would say, like, pretty clearly a top 5 shooter on planet Earth, ability to get to it off the dribble, legitimate 30 feet and in range. Like, he is just a genius of a shooter. My curiosity, I know I was talking to our buddy Wes over at Locked On Heat on the Locked On NBA pod, and he was mentioning that, you know what, like, as much as the shooting was a concern for them, his bigger concern was the initiation. And I took that to heart. I was like, but Desmond Bane is also really good at that, right? 96th percentile in assist percentage, according to Cleaning the Glass. You might say, well, he has ridiculous usage. Well, his assist to usage ratio is 86th percentile, right? So for a wing, he's a fantastic initiator. Obviously, Paolo can do some of that. Franz can do a lot of that. Jalen Suggs can do a lot of that. Is it feasible, like, where the Knicks and Cavs, right, are driven by these singular engines? I shouldn't even say that for the Cavs, right, because they have 2 between Garland and Mitchell. The Knicks have Jalen Brunson, and Orlando doesn't have one guy like that. Do you think they can initiate by committee? Do you think the shooting woes and the spacing woes will still crop up, even with Desmond Bane on there, or in one fell swoop, combined with some better health luck, did they address both those issues?
Yeah, it's definitely the big question. I mean, I think that is still a very fair question. Everyone kind of pointed to the Magic as needing a point guard. And I've been joking around with people all summer that, the Magic have kind of moneyballed the point guard position. Between Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane, and Jalen Suggs, they've got a point guard in the aggregate. On top of this, let's just adding to the point guard point, they added Tyus Jones in free agency as well. Solid backup point guard. Like, he's probably not going to impact the end of games as much or be a starter. If he is starting, that means, someone's hurt or something's gone wrong. But I think the idea for the Magic and kind of their, like, theory for their team building and I always say this too, to be one of the best teams in the league, you've got to do something that's unique. You got to do something that makes the other teams go, we have to really worry about this guy. Like, for the Knicks, that's Jalen Brunson is probably the most, outside of Kevin Durant, the most elite mid-range shooter, and is so crafty at getting to his spots and kind of keeping you off balance. Karl-Anthony Towns obviously is the best 3-point shooting center this league's probably ever seen. You have to do something that makes defense, that makes the other team game plan for you specifically. And so the Magic sort of theory of the case is, we've got players who do everything. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are both 6'10" guys who play like guards. And so the question, I think, that about whether this experiment is going to work or not comes down to, are the Magic going to hit enough threes to give them space to do the things that they do? Paolo, but again, like, Paolo averaged around 5-6 assists per game last year. Franz is up around 4 or 5 assists per game. Desmond Bane's averaged more than 5 assists per game over the last 2 seasons. I think the Magic will get that assist number up, but it's going to come down to, when Paolo Banchero drives to the paint and forces the defense to collapse on him, is he going to kick out to an open shooter that's going to make the shot? Last year, that didn't happen. The Magic had the worst 3-point shooting percentage at the league seen pretty much for the last decade. This is the fun stat of the day. The Orlando Magic were 27-10 in games where they shot 33% or better from 3. 33% is still the worst 3-point shooting percentage in the league. It's literally, they had to be competent from 3.
Yeah.
And they had a really good chance of winning because of their defense. Now, obviously, like, to play against elite teams, you're going to have to find a way to score against good defenses. And I think that's a fair question about what this Magic team can do. But I think the idea is, They added another playmaker in Desmond Bane. They added a shooter in Desmond Bane. Paolo continues to improve as a shooter. Jalen Suggs coming back in a more catch and shoot role where he's really surprisingly effective. I think the Magic feel like just adding that little bit of space of a little bit more playmaking and shooting is going to loosen the wheel a little bit offensively and allow them to compete more consistently.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I do think the by committee aspect works, and just it comes to like, I mean, you nailed it with Paolo. If you're willing to make quick decisions and just build off like an advantage and bust that door wide open and turn it into a wide open corner three. We've seen so many great offenses operate that way, right? This, like the Spurs playing the beautiful games for years. Like there wasn't obviously Tony Parker is a Hall of Fame point guard, was an extraordinary advantage creator, but there wasn't like the one mega all NBA initiator. And it was five guys who were willing to do that, make quick, great decisions. I buy the idea that the Magic have a number of guys who are really good in that area. And you can bring in guys off the bench like Jones, like Anthony Black, who can continue to do that and continue to play that way, as long as, I mean, for Black having to continue to shoot better, but that's true for so many guys. There are questions there, but I think it is going to net out really well for Orlando. I have a couple more questions on the Magic. I know you have some stuff you want to ask me about the New York Knicks. I am particularly curious about the continued development of Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, and if they cement themselves as legitimate all-NBA type superstars. We'll get into that in just a sec on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Magic. First things first, though, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. If your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. If you're anything like me and you've been struggling through football seasons, rooting for the Jets, rooting for the Giants, and it is just brutal to watch your favorite NFL team when they don't have a quarterback and they have no future at the position. Maybe that changes for the Giants this year. I don't really have high hopes for the Jets. You need a little bit more skin in the game, and FanDuel is a great way to do that. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy on Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, what's up? We're back on Locked On Knicks, Locked On Magic. Gavin, Schall, Philip, Rossman-Reich. We're talking superstars with the Orlando Magic. I was on Locked On NBA over the weekend, and we were drafting breakout players. I drafted Franz Wagner as my number one breakout player. Love his game. Love some of the underlying numbers on him and just how good Orlando is every time he's on the court. And I'm kind of shocked that he shot the ball as poorly as he has the last 2 years. Career 86% three-point shooter. For Knicks fans who don't know, he was over 35%. Oh, sorry, I might have misspoke there. 86% free throw shooter. For Knicks fans who don't know, he was at least 35% from three his first 2 years in the league, under 30% from three the last 2 years, under 20% from three in a series against the Boston Celtics where he shot a whole lot of them. And I think in general, like average fan, maybe average Magic fan, though I'm sure there's some controversy around this statement, Paolo Banchero is considered the tentpole more than Franz Wagner is. I personally think Franz, from what I've seen, is probably the better player, even though Paolo is the guy who's treated like the number one guy and the one who's just performed incredibly well offensively 2 postseasons in a row. You also don't necessarily have to pit them against each other. Like they might both have potential to be top 15 to 20 guys in the NBA as soon as next year. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think there are still really significant strides that both of them have to make?
I think it's both. Like it's honestly both. Like they're both really good as they are. And I think, I'm not one to pit either of them against each other. To be a great basketball team, to be a championship level team, you need top players. Like for all the arguments about Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, it was always like, no. The Celtics are not in the conference finals without both. They're not winning a championship without both. I mean, the Knicks are the same way. And I know there's always constantly like, how can we make this team better? And it's just like, no. Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns are two of the very best at what they do. They're the reason you're in that position. The grass is not always greener unless you're getting Luka Doncic or Anthony Davis. You're not going to drastically improve your team that way. So it really is both and the way that they play off of each other and kind of complement each other in a lot of ways, I think is really, really important too. Franz, I think Franz, to that point, like when we think about like superstar players, it's an attitude as much as anything else. And I think Franz understands he's a very good basketball player, but he doesn't have that I want the ball and I'm going to kind of knock you out type attitude. Like Paolo Banchero has that has that everywhere. Like he's just like, I will take the superstar shots. I will take the bad shots. Franz Wagner has never been that. And he still finds a way to average 25 points per game. I mean, I think one of the things that really was really helpful for him and came out of last year was that when Paolo was hurt, Franz kind of was forced to be that guy and really succeeded. Again, like he played really, really well in that role. And so now the Magic know they have that kind of in their back pocket. But I think if like just watching Franz play, like he's almost happier to defer and play off of somebody than be the quote unquote the guy. So I do think they complement each other well. But I also think it's important to remember Franz is 23, 24, Paolo's 22, 23. They've still got a lot of development to go. And I know that with the way that like the NBA collective bargaining agreements kind of structured now, your prime has to come a little earlier. Like your championship prime feels like it's coming earlier and earlier now, like because just salaries, bloom now. And it's harder to keep elite teams together with some of those big salaries. Obviously the Knicks are maybe an exception to that rule on many faces, but they're going to keep getting better. And so I feel like both are due for very big seasons. I think a lot of the arguments against Paolo Banchero are his inefficiency. And if you look at his full season numbers, he was pretty inefficient throughout the year, but he had a really tough time coming back from the oblique injury last year. If you take out that month that he came back from the injury, if you just look at his post All-Star break numbers, he played 24 games after the All-Star break. That's 24 of the 46. After the All-Star break, he averaged, I think, 29 points per game, shot 47% from the floor, 33% from three, which, obviously could still get better. He had a 58% true shooting percentage. If I'm not mistaken, that was 7th among players who had a 30% usage rate after the All-Star break. So I think Paolo has already made a pretty sizable leap, and hopefully he can get a full season, get some shooting that he can be confident in. Cause like, I think he is a willing passer. He wants to pass to open guys, but again, like the Magic shot 32% from three for the season last year, 31% from three for the season last year. It got to a point where Paolo was like, this mid-range jumper over a double team is a smarter shot than passing to an open 3-point shooter. And I can't blame him on that.
I'm sure it hits on some of the stuff that you already talked about, and the injury was part of it. Why is Orlando so much better when Franz Wagner is on the floor than when Paolo's on the floor? And obviously this is taking into account that they share a substantial amount of minutes, and you would think their net ratings, generally when you have two superstars like that who play the bulk of their minutes together, unless I'm off on that and correct me if I'm wrong, like the net rating numbers would be pretty similar. And yet last season, Orlando was plus 14 when Franz Wagner was on the floor, 98th percentile in the NBA. They were minus 2.7 when Paolo was on the floor, 38th percentile. I'd be inclined to dismiss that as a little bit of a fluke, but the season before that, they were plus 5.3 when Franz was on the floor, and they were minus 9.1 when Paolo's on the floor. Does that say like anything about Paolo's game? And like, especially again, given that caveat that Franz has not shot the ball well the last 2 years. So I would assume that there's not a huge gap in efficiency between the two. Like, is there any like logical explanation for that?
There is one that does play into it. Franz is often the one playing with the Magic's bench group. And especially the 2024 season, the Magic had, I think, the third highest scoring bench in the league. They won a lot of games because their bench was really good. And it was, Joe Ingles, Jonathan Isaac, Mo Wagner, Anthony Black, and then Franz Wagner was in that group. Jalen Suggs would join that group at times. Their bench group, when they're healthy, has been one of the best benches in the league. So if you look at the bench stats, they're going to be like saying like, no, where's this coming from? Before Mo Wagner's injury last year, the Magic had the 5th highest scoring bench in the league. And it was again, and that was with the injuries that they were facing because Franz got hurt in early December. So even deep into December, the Magic had one of the highest scoring benches in the league. After Mo Wagner's injury, they dropped to 17th or they dropped in the 20s, like 21st, 22nd. Franz anchoring those bench units, not going up against the best defender on the other team, perhaps, the way that Paolo does, I think says a lot. I think that, Paolo is learning how to be a star and how to deal with the attention that comes with a star. If I'm not mistaken, he is in the top 10, at least in the top 15 in the league in most double teams faced. And obviously some of that has to do with the shooting and the way that defenses collapse around him. He's typically in against other starters. And so I think that's where, Paolo's inefficiency as a shooter comes into play. But a lot of that is just like the situation that he's in. Franz just does not face the same level of attention and double teams that Paolo faces. Because, again, maybe Paolo is a little bit more of an ISO player than Franz is. Franz will run some pick and rolls, but he'll also move the ball. He'll score on cuts. He'll score on pin downs, and he'll score on shots in a way that Paolo doesn't always score on. And so I think there are a number of factors on this, but at the same time, yes, Franz is a much more efficient scorer. He will get to the basket a lot more effectively. Paolo is a little bit more of a bulldozer, and at times will settle for mid-range jumpers. And he's, an improved three-point shooter, but still not a great three-point shooter. So, there are obviously a lot of ways that these guys can get better. And, the Magic gave Paolo, obviously, that super max. If he's going to be worked at, he's got to climb those rankings and be a little bit more efficient and effective when he's on the floor.
All right, that's fascinating, because that was maybe one of the numbers that's intrigued me the most.
Yeah, no, it's everyone.
Yeah. All right. Last thing on those two. How does what do we make of Franz Wagner's jumper? Because if he figures it out, to me, when I watch him shoot, especially in international play, and if you just didn't tell me a percentage on it right now, I was just seeing him play for the first time, be like, that guy is a 36%, 37% three-point shooter on volume. And again, if to everything you said, if he masters the mentality, if he figures out his jumper, top 15 might be low. He might be a clear-cut top 10 best player in the NBA, right? He's that good defensively, that good getting to the rim, that dynamic. Is there optimism in Orlando that he's going to figure that out? It's just a matter of time, just needs to work on it over the summer? Or is that just sort of all right, it's 2 years of it, this might just be who he is with a little bit of improvement as a shooter?
Yeah, there's optimism in the fact that they know how hard of a worker he is at it. And if you've been watching, we're recording this in August before Eurobasket begins. If you've watched any of his games before Eurobasket and compare what his shot looks like now compared to what it did during the season, especially after his injury, it looks night and day. The form looks more fluid. It looks more consistent. It looked, everyone's been trying to figure out what's wrong with his shot, because he came back from the oblique injury and had this weird hitch in his shot, and nobody would talk about it. We tried to get Franz to talk a little bit about it after the season. He didn't really want to talk about it. He was not super keen to talk about it. He acknowledged, I have to get better. I have to make more threes. And I think he's clearly put more work into it. He's still comfortable enough to shoot and confident enough to shoot. But as we're recording this, through 4 exhibition games, Franz Wagner is shooting 3 for 18 from 3. And it's, he was 2 for 9 in the game against Serbia. That was on the Saturday before we're recording this. There's still, at the end of the day, they got to go win. And it's not even so much about the percentage. I always say this. It's less about your percentage, which you obviously need to make threes. It's about the threat that the defense perceives of you 100%. As a 3-point shooter. And if you're a 20%, if you're below 30, those driving lanes that Franz wants are gone. The defenses are going to say, take that 3. We'll live with you making 1 out of 5 of those, or 2 out of, or whatever the case may be. 2 out of 6 of those, whatever it is. He's just got to be enough of a threat to get defenses to pay attention to him, give Paolo that extra inch of space, give Desmond Bane that extra inch of space, or to attack a closeout when they try to get to him. They can't get to a point where defenses just stare at him and say, take that shot. And that's kind of where the Magic were at last year.
Got it. I am curious about this entire roster. I could probably spend 2 hours with you talking about the Orlando Magic. I've hogged a lot of our time. I want to talk some New York Knicks. We'll get into that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Magic.
All right, guys, we'll be back in just a second to wrap things up with Philip. But first, I want to remind you, Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn a little bit more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for helping us out.
All right, we are back for this crossover edition of Locked On Magic and Locked On Knicks. Philip, I'm going to cede the proverbial mic. Mine's broken to you. What do you want to know about the Knicks?
I think the biggest thing that I want to know is because I'm a huge fan of what the Knicks did last year and what the Knicks have done over the last 2 years. But my big concern for them is, what is the effect of, for all his eccentricities and everything everyone always complains about him, what is going to be the biggest effect of switching from Tom Thibodeau to Mike Brown?
It's a great question. And I think the hope would be lineup optimization is the most obvious one. He played the Knicks starters. Knicks fans cover your ears because they're tired of hearing me talk about this. But they played the Knicks starting five played over 1,800 possessions last year. I haven't looked at the numbers in a while. So
What's that
I've
like?
thankfully maybe blotted them out of my mind. Eternal sunshine of a spotless mind. There we go. That's what I was trying to think of. I think the next most used lineup in the league was maybe 1,100, maybe 1,200 possessions, right? He played this group so much. And then you hear that, you're like, all right, well, that must have been the best lineup in the league, right, Gavin? No, in fact, after January 1st for 2025, they were net negative. I'm pretty sure they had a -3 net rating after January 1st. Teams of smart teams, I believe the Magic are one of them, started putting their wings on Karl-Anthony Towns and their centers on Josh Hart. That destroyed the Jalen Brunson Cat two-man game that at the time was the best pick and roll duo in terms of points per possession in the NBA. And Tom Thibodeau never really adjusted off of that. He didn't really look into 5-out lineups. Deuce McBride was the only player on the Knicks that featured in all 5 of their best lineups last season. So I thought it would have made a lot of sense to start him. Tom Thibodeau did not agree. I would have said, all right, if you're not going to do that, maybe try to go double big with Mitchell Robinson, lean into defense, lean into rebounding. He did not do that until game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers. And by then it was too little, too late. Just they didn't have the reps with that group to really make it work. Even within that series, they were much better with Deuce on the floor. They were much better with Landry Shamet on the floor. They're much better with DeLon Wright on the floor. And it seemed as if when the Knicks had success, Tom Thibodeau did not recognize why that success was happening. And despite so much good that he did, despite that he, again, is clearly the best coach the Knicks have had in 25 years, and there's a very real world where Mike Brown is not an upgrade and this backfires and the Knicks backslide, and it looks like they made a terrible mistake moving on from Tom Thibodeau. I personally can't get there because to me, it was abundantly clear they were never winning a championship with Tom Thibodeau. They were never maxing out with Tom Thibodeau, and they don't have an Oklahoma City type of roster where they have that margin for error where they could have a suboptimal coach and still win a championship. They need to be optimized in every single facet if they want to win a championship. They're hoping Mike Brown's the guy to get that done. I know I just advocated for him and mostly saying who he is not, but I think that's the best way to go about it because on paper, there are a lot of similarities between the two. And I think Mike Brown brings a lot of the same strengths to the table. The hope is, and I think an area where he does excel a little bit more, at the very least, there'll be a little bit more scheme versatility. And just by the fact that he's not Tom Thibodeau, there'll be a little bit more lineup versatility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense, and I mean, I'm a big believer of you be proactive. The Magic were proactive going after Desmond Bane. We all thought they were just going to settle for Anthony Simons or Colin Sexton and risk their defense to add the offense that they needed. I think you got to move early on these things, and Tom Thibodeau put the Knicks in a position where we can talk about them as a championship level team, and I think that's really important. Now Mike Brown is very much, I feel like, the same level of coach where he is defensive minded. And I think with all the offensive players that the Knicks have, and their offense is still scary, having a defensive minded coach with, Mike Brown's going to bring some warrior, he was his Kings offense was really good, even when his defense faltered. He'll bring some of that warrior style into it as well. And so I think that there's definitely room for improvement, other than the depth thing, and New York addressed, I think, adding more players to trust this summer. I think what the Knicks, what do you think of what the Knicks did this summer to add and address some of the depth with Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele?
Yeah, I've spoken about it a lot. I mean, I think they did everything they can with the money available to add 2 guys that I think are, you could certainly quibble on Jordan Clarkson, but I would argue 2 guys that are probably playable over, you always hear the term 16-game players, right? 2 guys that could probably get on the floor in the NBA Finals. I think Jordan Clarkson is really underrated as a shot creator, given who his teammates were on the Jazz, given that there's just a terrible team. And certainly his defense at times will hurt the Knicks. And the Knicks, interestingly enough, even though offense was a problem for them in the second half of the year, again, after that January 1st date, they were 16th in offensive rating after being a historically good offense early in the season. I do think they can solve a lot of that again with just better lineup usage, but Clarkson takes his strength and makes it even stronger with his ability as a shot creator, his ability to hit off the dribble threes. And the Knicks did have a clear-cut weakness that got exposed offensively somewhat in the playoffs. I think it was the lack of shot creation beyond Jalen Brunson and maybe not quite enough shooting, at least in the context of the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. And they solved both of those to some extent in Clarkson. Yabusele, I think, maybe doesn't quite have those highs. But in terms of just a player who doesn't take a lot off the table, right? Like solid, like at worst, a slightly below average defender, 42% above the break 3-point shooter, ability to attack closeouts, good in transition, and just like a dog with a W, right? Like he's gonna get after. We all saw the dunk on LeBron in the Olympics last year. Like I'm really excited about his competitive spirit and how he'll fit in on this team, and maybe like again help return them to the heights they had just from like I guess like a psychological perspective in that 23-24 season. And I think they lost maybe a little bit of that edge last season, even though it was very apparently still there when they had back-to-back 20+ point comebacks against the Boston Celtics. So I think both those guys are great. I do think, and this is something who knows when this episode's going to come out, who knows when that episode's going to come out, but with Josh Lloyd of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, the deep depth is still a little bit of a concern from them, right? I think 1 through 9, the roster is I'd put up there with pretty much any in the NBA. 10 through 14 or 15, like some more questions. They still have one more spot to fill, will likely be Landry Shamet or Ben Simmons. Malcolm Brogdon is a dark horse for that final spot. I'm hoping personally it's either Brogdon or Shamet, and I think those guys could go a long way to quelling some of those concerns. The Knicks did benefit from remarkably good health last season, and if they, like you made the point right at the beginning of the show, if that flips for the Knicks and they have the wrong injury at the wrong time, just like so many teams in the Eastern Conference, I don't know if they have the margin for error to survive that, even if they've optimized on the margins as much as they can, unless you're the Thunder. Like it feels like no team has the depth to survive the wrong injury at the wrong time these days.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and no team can survive like injury to the top guy. And I think that's a little bit what happened maybe in 2023. The other thing I wanted to ask is, I'm a big believer in continuity. Like I think like experience, having gone deep in the playoffs, matters as you're trying to build and grow. Being able to come together as a team very quickly matters. The Knicks obviously made the trade for Karl-Anthony Towns super late last year, and they were still successful and they made it deep. What do you expect from year 2 of Cat, now that he may be a little bit more comfortable in his surroundings, and even with a new coach, like the players are more comfortable with him than maybe they were as they were figuring it out last year?
Yeah, so it's a great point, and it's something I always think about, because you are balancing continuity with fit and collective IQ, I think. And the last part is probably always been the issue with Cat, particularly in the defensive end of the floor. And like there were the Athletic put out what was I don't want to say a hit piece in the sense that I think it was fair and it was probably warranted, but pretty much the second the Knicks lost last year, a piece dropped talking about the collective frustration with Cat's like just inability to know the coverage, right? And you could be forgiven for having slow feet. You can be forgiven for having like high hips and just not being great at playing, like just not a great drop defender from a physical perspective. And Cat certainly just like, despite all of his athleticism offensively, has some physical limitations on the end of the floor. What's paramount is that to offset that, you know the coverage every single time. And there were just so many times, like even throughout the playoffs, where it was pretty clear Cat didn't know the coverage, and you could see the frustration of Mikal Bridges, who so many of those mistakes were often pinned on, and he was lamented, like rightfully, is like B-ball indexes. I think he was their worst high volume screen navigator in basketball last year. But a lot of that, like it becomes really difficult to be a high level screen navigator when you don't know what you're getting on the other end of that, right? You don't know, like, your bigs and drop when he's supposed to be at the level, or vice versa. So some of that is on Cat to just have a little bit more discipline, be a little bit smarter. You still saw some of those same mistakes in Minnesota in terms of like frustration, committing stupid fouls, like constantly like going full speed to the basket, which sometimes resulted in awesome shots, often resulted in him on the floor while another team came down 5-on-4 and got an easy layup. Some of the mental miscues have to get cleaned up. And Mike Brown can also help him with that, right? By playing him in different schemes like Cat. And it's questionable how sustainable this is as a regular season strategy, but he looked far better against the best teams in the NBA when he was allowed to switch. And he had surprising success on guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Trae Young, like holding up on an island versus playing drop defense, which was Tom Thibodeau's preference. And it was not even a square peg into a round hole, right? This is a test of my shapes knowledge, but it was like a rhombus into a dot. Like it just didn't work. And I'm hoping Mike Brown acknowledges that and says, all right, we're going to try some zone. We're going to try some switching. We're going to try some blitzing and then recovering, right? Just mixing it up. using him different ways. Maybe that makes it even harder on Cat from a mental perspective, but I think all that can go a long way to mitigating his weaknesses, and you can lean into his strengths, which include being, I think, just flat out one of the great shot makers on planet Earth. We saw it against the Pistons. He bailed the Knicks out multiple times, and when he was allowed to, which is why I'm not really an advocate of starting Mitchell Robinson, when he was allowed to play as a 5 and he was guarded as a 5, like we saw him against the Indiana Pacers, like he was just completely terrifying and unstoppable for stretches of that series. A lot of that success came when Jalen Brunson was on the bench, and that's one of my big concerns. Like both those guys seemingly look better when the other's not on the court. Again, I think surrounding them by shooting will go a long way towards fixing that. But I'm fascinated if there could be legitimate two-man synergy there, and that's not all on Cat. Like Brunson would consistently miss like these simple like tossbacks in like hook passes back in pick and pops for easy threes. So I do think chemistry plays a role. I also think IQ will play a big role in their success.
All right, guys, that is it for part 1 of our crossover with Philip. But if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you're not, we will have a lengthy part 2 tomorrow where it's very similar with Koo. I think the good stuff is in the second episode where we dive even deeper on the Knicks Magic matchup. We talk about just how good the Knicks offense has to be for them to ultimately win a championship and whether the Knicks experience will be a difference maker between the two teams. But until then, be good. We'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.